Coach, thank you so very much for being on the show. I'm excited to talk with you about your experiences at Northern Michigan, life in Division II, and as always, we'll have our 650s on the top at the end. So welcome to the warm down pool.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Question I got to ask, because I have been there. I swam at Ashland University. We were in the GLIAC conference. What drew you to the Upper Peninsula? Because I've been there in February and I've seen the snowfall or the snowbanks, and I know there are tunnels connecting buildings, but you left New Mexico State for the Upper Peninsula. Tell me about what drew you to that.
Well, first of all, I grew up in Montana, so snow doesn't scare me, and I really love nature and being out. I have to say, when I was at New Mexico State, I had such a good mentor in Rick Pratt, and he was someone that really had started me thinking about being a head coach, because I kind of thought I was on this path of I'll just be an assistant and my job is to support the program and the head coach, and I just hadn't really thought that was something that maybe I could do or would be interested in. And he was really good about pushing me and saw something in me that said, no, you should be looking. You'll do such a good job, and you'll love it having your own program. And he's right. There's something to the fact that, those decisions are all yours. That's good and bad, right? When things go well, that's great. When things aren't as good, you have to put on the other hat and be, yeah, nope, it's all on me. So there's some added pressures, but really good benefits as well. And so after my second year at Mexico, I started kind of looking around, and I threw my resume in and got a phone interview. And I will tell you, after the phone interview, they wanted to fly me in, and I had to find it on the map. I was like, I don't even know where I'm going. But landing into the UP, and I didn't even know that was a term until I got here. I just remember the flight in, just looking around at the lakes and the forest and the huge Lake Superior was so beautiful. I just really thought, this is a beautiful place. I loved the campus. I had two young kids at the time, 6 months and 3 years old. And I thought, two boys, this is going to be a great place to raise family. And, one of the things the administrator said when I got here too, they said, this is the kind of place that people don't leave all the time, if you really love it. And 13 years later, I'm still here. But I think the nature part of it, and that's what we look for in our recruits too, is people that want to be out in nature, because it's such a prevalent thing here on campus.
I know, having gone to Ashland, we had the GLIAC championships there in 1997. That was my senior year. I've had teammates who lived in the northern part of the Lower Peninsula, Mackinac specifically. Going across the Mackinac Bridge for the first time at 1 o'clock in the morning is one of the most terrifying things ever, because you just think they're not going to find us till spring thaw if we go off of this thing. And I've seen enough pictures, but being up there and seeing how beautiful it is. And again, I grew up in Northern Ohio. I'm used to snow, but I'd never seen it at that level. And I always was curious of how do you choose a school in the Upper Peninsula? And it's not like there's just Northern Michigan. It's the only school, because I know Michigan Tech is up there and Lake Superior State is up there. And I'm going to talk about them in just a little bit when we start talking more about your experiences with Division II and that changing landscape, because I think it's really important to bring them up, because you're actually going to have somebody close to swim here in the near future. So I've always been fascinated with the people who have coached up there. Alaska is another one because of the environment, but you're right, especially in the summer. It is gorgeous up there, all of the green. It's one of the things that drew me to here in Eastern Kentucky, being in the foothills of the Appalachians, and just seeing it up there is just truly gorgeous. And my hat is off to you, because I know what a pain in the butt it is to plow snow or shovel snow in this area, and as well as Ohio. That's an Olympic sport up there. It really is.
No, yeah, for sure. And I will say it is helpful that my son is now 16 and does a lot of shoveling. So that's great. But I will say, I also spent 5 years at the University of Wyoming. And the one great thing about here is we are right on Lake Superior. So I'm not sure I quite fully understand, but we have this lake effect snow. So we get a lot of snow, but it stays a little warmer. It's not, there was definitely moments in Wyoming and even growing up in Montana where I call it like snot freezing weather. Like you walk out, you're like, woo, and you're like, or even in Minneapolis and stuff. But we don't get that as much. And the lake keeps us a little warmer, but we do get that a lot of snow. And the one thing great about this community, it's a community that loves to have it. So there's always things going on. I took my kids night cross country skiing with headlamps, and you could just get out, and I could do that on my lunch hour and come back.
Yep.
And that's the great thing. And there's also, they embrace it. We have a dog sled race in the middle of town in February, which is always fun to go down. They block off the streets and they start the UP 200, and that's a fun thing too, to make sure the athletes get to see, because that's an experience maybe someone from Australia may never see. So we make sure to try to have them get to see that kind of stuff. But I do feel like, yes, we do get a lot of snow, but I don't ever get too cold. And the other thing too about it is it's also a community that's ready for it. So the roads are plowed, the sidewalks are shoveled for the student athletes and all the students, and they're salted. They're ready for it. It's not like you're going to be trudging through it all day. Yeah, no, I've really embraced it, and again, yeah, I'm super excited for the summer. We're going to be on the beach in July, and actually probably today it's 70 degrees. That's always great. And one thing I will say, another thing about when you're talking about the bridge, I've started, it's just for fun. Anybody who wants to do it the weekend before school starts, we do a swim from the Lower Peninsula to the Upper Peninsula. So they swim all along the Mackinac Bridge. And I think we've done it about 8 times. And I only take like college swimmers, and it's a beautiful swim. We have a pilot boat, and I kayak with them. And yeah, it's just kind of a fun thing that we do, and another thing that embraces what we get to do here. It is a beautiful swim.
Well, that explains why you've had so much good success in open water swimming. When you go down to Florida for the CSCA Open Water Championships, the water temperature is slightly warmer, so those kids are like, we got this, no problem.
Yeah, piece of cake.
You get there in 2010, 2011. That's your first season in Northern Michigan, women's only program at the time. And 2016 rolls around, and one of the exciting things that doesn't happen a whole lot in our sport, the return of a men's swimming program, which they didn't have it when I was an undergrad in the 90s. I'm not even sure when the last time they had a men's program, but now you are coaching both the men and the women. Tell me how introducing that new dynamic into your program changed not only how you practice, but changed how you adjusted your culture, because I've coached women's only at the University of Nevada. That's where you and I first met, when you were at New Mexico State with Rick Pratt. And obviously a women's only team is one thing, but now when you interject guys into the equation, and I'm not saying it as a negative, but it definitely changes your culture. Talk to me about how you made those adjustments and what were the things that you were looking at?
Yeah, it is definitely adjustment, something that, we did get pretty excited about. One of the fun things was, I think the last men's team was 1980, 1981, but we had, just incredible success in the 70s with the men's program, and our women have a great history as well. Kind of a fun moment where all these men that swam in the 70s reaching out, and a bunch of them came back, and I think it really set up our culture when we had our first men's program. They came back to homecoming. A bunch of them brought scrapbooks and were showing pictures, and I really think it made them feel like we're not a new team. We have an obligation for these men that are looking to us to bring back the success that they had, and they're always following us and reaching out. That's been super fun, because I think it didn't feel like a new program. It was like, no, there's been a culture here, and we're going to extend that. And you're right, going from women's only, which is always fun. I think it's super important to have 3 team identities. You need to have a women's team identity, a men's team identity, and then they have to have a team identity like together. So just trying to keep those fosters. We do different things. We go on a fall camping trip, and we have a women's night and a men's night. They need to be able to bond separately, and then they train together all week. And then Saturdays, we have a men's practice and a women's practice. And those are some of my favorite practices, because some of the men or some of the women haven't seen their counterpart, their sprinter and distance versus counterpart all week, and then they get to be together. And so that's a fun moment too. But I do think it's important, and we've worked hard to set that up. Now, telling our women, we're pretty excited when we've got to introduce men. They were very helpful in the recruiting process. Men's recruits in, and the women had to show them around. So that was fun too. And we had two women's captains that first year of men, and they were great. They really, Katie Bergenon and Sam Clements, and they really, got in those men's faces, even though they were like 2 feet taller than them sometimes. And we had a guy, Renars, he was 6'8" from Lafayette, and he was really he did a really good job relating to them. And they, they came in with right attitudes. But you're right, it was fun to introduce that whole new dynamic. It also was a little eye-opening for me. All of a sudden you're going from one practice a night to two, and they're trying to, have you just doubled your, NCAA paperwork and everything else. So there was definitely learning curve in all of a sudden we have double the people to manage. But it's a great benefit, and they've really come together.
That's amazing. I know, coming from a women's only program and coming into a men's and women's environment, there were a lot of things that I had to adjust to as a coach. And one of the things that you brought up that I do as well is that Saturday morning, men's practice, women's practice. I think it's very important on those days to have the teams separate genders, for the simple reason of there are different issues that you have to address with the men's team that you have to address with the women's team. And throughout the course of a week, if you've got two practices going on, they're mixed, and you really can't address them until you get to them that day. And you can have those team meetings to talk about upcoming meets or mid-season or tapers or maybe some issues that are on the team or recruits coming in. And it's very specific to the team as opposed to the whole program. And I always have to remind my athletes, and other coaches have echoed this as well, I have two teams, I have one program. And the program is the men and women together. You work together, you train together, you hang out together all the time. But I have two teams that I have to treat slightly different. For the guys, sometimes I got to stroke some egos, and sometimes I got to remind them they shouldn't have an ego. For the ladies, I don't know about your ladies, but for me, I can beat on them in terms of a training standpoint. I'm not going to obviously berate them or anything like that. No, but I can challenge them a little bit harder. I can push them a little bit further. And yeah, they're not going to be happy with me, but at the end of the day, I know they're going to respond differently than the guys. I'm not going to say better. I'm not going to say worse, but I'm going to say differently. And I think that's a very important thing, to allow those programs to have a chance to have that identity. Because if you're intermixed the whole time as a program, especially if you're a guy, your ego gets bruised very easily if one of the women goes by you, or if you're a lady and you're getting run over by the guys, it can affect your training mood where I'm the only girl in the distance group. I'm about to get run over by the guys, which ironically here, my top distance girls generally are the ones that they don't break down as fast as my guys. So the guys are the ones who get hurt. But I think it's critical that we are focusing on the program as a whole, but as teams individually or teams separately, and then swimmers individually. I think there's a flow chart. If you had to do a Maslow's pyramid or whatever, you have to incorporate that. And I'm glad to see that you were able to do that seamlessly, bringing your men's program in, because I can only imagine how that could be perceived, as the women's team's like, hey, we had all the attention and now we got to split it, and they could react negatively. But it sounds like in your case, you had a great experience bringing those guys in and molding them into your program. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and it wasn't too much of like a shock. Like, they knew it was coming. We had a year to recruit. So we had lots of moments to, even like role play. What would we do in this situation, and how do we help them? And I think they're really excited to get some men for their team cheers. That's always helpful.
A little bit louder.
A little bit louder. But I also think, having that separate Saturday practice also gives a little respect sometimes, when maybe someone hasn't trained with, a different training group all week. They don't really know or haven't seen somebody swim fast in practice. And usually, I'm sure, like everybody else, Saturdays, some lactate, something racing. And I do think there is a moment where, like, oh, yeah, really watching someone else swim strong, and they haven't got to watch them train, to really open it up and bringing the whole team together. So there's no question on, sometimes there's the sprinters do a 25 fast and that's it. But, when they pop off these amazing times, like 6 100s on 8 minutes or something, there's a lot of respect there for everything that everyone's doing to make the team better. So I think that's also important.
You draw different energy for different practices, and it helps the specific team to have that energy. It definitely does. And I've always been a huge advocate of that. I saw that as an athlete. We didn't split our groups up on Saturdays when I was swimming at Ashland, and it showed. But later on, I had the opportunity at another school, Valparaiso, where we did that. And I went, okay, I'm taking this with me. This is going into the toolbox.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned it in that part right there. Men and women, obviously, Saturday separate practices, going throughout the course of the week, different training groups. Talk me through, if I'm a swimmer walking into your program, let's say I'm a distance swimmer or a sprinter, whatever, what am I going to be seeing at Northern Michigan from a training group standpoint? And what is your training style? Or the one the recruits always ask is, what's your philosophy? My philosophy is you go fast and I'm happy, but that's a little too basic. But walk me through a week at Northern Michigan in terms of your training groups and your training style.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things that we talk about is communication. In general, you have your sprint group, your mid-distance group, and your distance group. And we do a lot of 400 IMers into that distance group. But there's a lot of kind of switching over during the week. So, for instance, on Mondays, I have a first practice group that's like a 200 IM base and some distance base, and maybe kind of sometimes mirroring it after our day one conference, like the 1,000 and the 200 IM. And then the second practice is that sprinter base, the 50 people, and they really focus on power and just like, going all out, lots of rest and resistance and different things. In general, we have those three groups, but then we have people that may swim with me in that 200 IM group, and then we'll go swim with my associate head coach, Matt Williams, who's just incredible. We'll swim with him in a 100 fly group on the next day, or focused on some of those power, but yet short, like 100 stroke. Does that make sense? So kind of we sit everyone down and kind of pick. The great thing about Division II, which I feel like a lot of recruits and stuff don't know, is we swim a 4-day national meet. So most of our conference is 4 days. So we sit down with them and say, you need to have 4 events. I think it's hard sometimes you get those recruits say, yeah, but my 100 breast is really good. I'm like, but you gotta figure out how to score in 3 other places. Like that's important. But so we will kind of during the week, depending on those 4 events, kind of get them into different things. And like, for instance, on Friday, I might have a bigger distance group, but then I have a 200 foot breast, 200 backstroke group, like the mid group where they go. And then the next practice is really 100 freestyle focused. And so we kind of have those general 3 groups like everybody does, but there's a little bit of flow where people may be flowing to different things depending on what they may be, trying to get to for those 4 events. It is also a great division if you're a good distance swimmer. We're I think the only division that does the 1,000 and the mile. A lot of other divisions don't do that. So something to think about. Those distance swimmers out there, you get to have those 2 events instead of just trying to do a 200 maybe if you're not a 200 swimmer. So
I know. So back in the 90s, Division II has had a 4-day format forever. They've had it before anybody else. They had it well before Division III, I think, is a 4-day format as well now. Division I goes to 2.5 day now that they're going to time final relays, which I'm a huge advocate for. NAIA is now a 3.5 day format. And they were the first to add the 1,000 as a competitive event. And I remember when it got added, the head coach at Ashland at the time, Paul Graham, told me, he goes, it only makes sense. We swim it in a dual meet. Why are we not doing it at nationals? And I only thought in the back of my head, it was like Doran Cott would have made me swim the 1,000, the 500, the mile, and my off day would have been the 400 IM. So that would have been a nice warm glass of, no, they do. And what I loved about the 4-day format is they did the one thing that I wish they would have done no matter what, is they split they split the 200 fly and they split the 200 backstroke, because there's so many athletes that can double up that, and they do it so well. And I was one of them. I had the fortune of doing the 2 fly on day 3 because the 500 was still on day 1. We didn't have the 1,000, and I was 500, 400 IM, 2 fly, 2 back. It was the perfect setup. And my freshman year was the mile. So it was great. But at conference, 3 of my best events were all on day 3, and there was no way I was tripling that. So, but Division II has always been unique in that regard. And again, even back then, you could do 4 individual events. For those of us who were relay challenged, distance swimmers, looking at you.
Yeah.
It was a great opportunity that you can swim. And I'm assuming the rules are still the same. 7 events, no more of which can be 4 individuals. So yeah. And I think tactically that changes the dynamic of a meet in a major way. So now you have that miler, 1,500 freestyler who they might be on your 8 free relay or they might not. Well, now they might be able to pick up a 2 free or a 4 IM, and they have that opportunity to score points where they wouldn't be on an 8 free, where they certainly weren't going to be on a 2 free relay. I would love to see all divisions go that way. I know we in the NAIA talked about it. I think that's something we may look at down the road. I would be willing to bet, looking at how Division I conferences are going right now. I mean, the SEC is a 5-day championship, which that blows my mind that you're going to be there for 5 days. How do you taper for that? I want to talk to a coach on that, but I would love to see them go to that format because you're going to see a lot more athletes be able to do some of these doubles that they haven't done. Perfect example. How many 400 IMers do you know could do a really good 100 breaststroke, but they can't in a 3-day format, but they can in a 4-day because the 100 breast and the 4 IM are 2 different days. So
that's a perfect setup for those breaststroker IMers. They get to do 200 IM, 400 IM, 100 breast, 200 breast. So we have several people that do that as well. It's a great lineup. Yeah.
And I've got a young man right now. We did it at conference, but we didn't do it at nationals. He's a 4,900 flyer and he's a 5,500 breaststroker. Yeah. Long access strokes do not exist in this kid's vocabulary. It's all short access. But again, in a 4-day format,
allows it to do it.
You could do it. Yeah, selfish reasons. That's why I want to see us go. But I also love the fact that Division II athletes, and I'm not picking on D1 or D3 or NAIA. Obviously, I'm loyal to the NAIA, but you have to have versatile athletes because whereas I'm looking for athletes who can score in 3 individual events, you got to have a 4th event to be in Division II to be viable at the conference and then at the national level. And I think that is critical from a recruiting standpoint, which segues me beautifully, if not shamelessly, into what are some things from a recruiting standpoint. Obviously, versatility is critical, but when you're going out and you're looking for an athlete to come to Northern Michigan, what is something that is very important to you in the recruiting process, whether it's what you're telling them to what they're going to expect or the vetting process for you? But what do you look for in a recruit?
Well, I think number one, team fit. We talk a lot about that because you can have someone come in that doesn't buy into your team culture, and that just can be hard on everyone, and that doesn't help anybody. So we definitely look at team fit and, having them on campus and we get down there and having them go to meals, and we actually take them for a hike. Usually it's on our recruiting itinerary. Again, my associate head coach, Matt Williams, is our recruiting coordinator, and he does an amazing job. And we usually always have a hike on there. Someone's hiking up Sugarloaf, which is about 7 minutes from the dorms drive for the trailhead. I think, looking at that, because our team does a lot of that. They like to go camping. They like to go play on the beach. Those are the kind of things we look at. But I also like a person who can communicate. Like I had said, when we talk about our practices, I think communication is huge. They need to be able to say, we may have a sprinter that wants to do distance one day a week because they just feel better when they do. And that's something that we trust them and we talk about it, but they have to be able to talk to us about it. You have to communicate. So I think looking at how their communication is with us, sometimes I think all coaches have gotten some recruits where either they're nervous on the phone or they give you those 1-word answers and you're like trying to get some more information out of them. I look at that, like they have to be able to talk to me, and we have to have that open line of communication on how their training is going and how they're fitting in, how are things going for them, because I'm always the advocate. I think if you needed a 1-line philosophy for me is a happy swimmer is a fast swimmer is a happy swimmer, right? Like they have to be in a good mental and positive spot to be able to train and race well. All aspects of their life have to be going well. So I'll even talk about that, a little bit, like what do you do outside the pool for fun? And, how do you deal with your stresses? We kind of talk about that as well. But I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of them love to be outdoors. They want to be involved with the team. There's kind of a running joke in our cafeteria. There's one table that everybody kind of knows on campus. That's a swimming table, and that's where they all go sit. And kind of one of the things that we've learned that I don't get to see all the time is that that's where they go and decompress with each other, and there's always someone there that they can go talk to and that's hanging out. And those are important, right, for their mental health, to have connection, to their team as well too. So I think those are some of the biggest things.
I think that's a critical one. It's definitely critical when you are bringing a recruit into your program and having an opportunity to talk with them. Obviously, there's a lot of athletes that they're not very communicative. They're not very open. It takes a little time to crack that nut, if you will. And there's been a few athletes where on a recruiting visit, they one word answer, oh, they're not going to be a good fit. And then they turn around, they join the program, and this whole new personality just jumps out. And you're like, where was this? Where was I? But then you have the others that when you bring them in, you talk with them, and maybe it's because their parents are there and they're more open, but they're also giving you a side of them that isn't authentic. And I think we've all had those recruits where you're like, who are you? I didn't recruit you. I recruited the person that was saying that they had a great work ethic and a positive mental attitude. And I think we're seeing a little bit more now with athletes not having the communication skills that, let's say, you and I had in the process, because we grew up when we were recruited, because you and I have been in the game about the same amount of time in terms of swimming. We had to answer the house phone, and kids don't know what that is anymore. And I remember I sat there, however long I could walk was however long that cord was. And I had to wait for a coach to call me, and I wasn't getting a text message telling me when they were going to call. And I think now more than ever, it's becoming a little bit more challenging to maintain that dialogue, that communication with kids, because they're struggling to put into words what they can normally text. And I think it's important for us as coaches that we're working with them. And I've talked to coaches who are great at it. They've got wonderful communication skills. And then I talk to myself and I don't have those things. And that's something that's a work in progress for, I think, all of us as coaches, is being able to be relatable, but not be too personable. It's one of those that you've got to find that balance, and coaches and athletes are going to have to do some give and take.
I touch on that moment that you said, sometimes, when they're coming in with their parents and talking together, sometimes you don't get a good feel because the parents have lots of questions, which is great. So when we have our recruiting trips, we try to find that one meal where we're kind of specific, like, this is not for parents. This is just a breakfast with coaches and another athlete. And I think it's good to have at least that one meal or where they're going to go with the team now to the dorms and have that minute. And if they can, because we will also ask the host, what do you think? And sometimes they're more open and talkative with the hosts, and we will definitely take that into consideration. Like, okay, maybe they were just one wording answers to me and they were nervous, but they were communicating with the team, and that's a good moment too. But we try to build, at least one moment in there on their visit, so we make sure that we really get to know them as well, because that's who you're going to be with.
That's the critical one, is that they're able to connect with the athletes and understand what's expected of them as a member of Northern Michigan University Wildcats, University of the Cumberland's Patriots, or the University of Virginia Cavaliers. It doesn't matter whether it's NAIA to Power 5. If they can't connect and they aren't going to buy into what your athletes expect of them, then one of two things. Number one, you don't need that athlete. Number two, you haven't established what the vision of your program is very well to your athletes. And I think I've seen that with some programs. I've talked to some coaches, especially young coaches, because they don't necessarily have the direction of how to establish what's expected. And I think they struggle with that line of being a coach or being a friend. And I'm not talking about swimming. I'm talking about all sports. And I think that's where we see a lot of coaches that have had poor mentorship or poor experiences working under other coaches. I know for me, I've worked under some great coaches. I know Rick Pratt. Rick has a great reputation, great guy. You and I have talked about him at length. I've worked with several other coaches and had an opportunity to work under a great athletic director here who, especially when I became a head coach, and the first time you sit in that big chair and you got to discipline a swimmer or discipline an athlete, I went to my AD for the first time. I'm like, here's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Talk me off the ledge. Randy was great with that. So culture is the word Culture is the word we keep hearing more and more, talking about our programs and how to build it. And I think it's a very fluid environment. You aren't going to just say, well, this is what I expected in 1997, and that holds true today. It doesn't work that way. People change, the cultures change, the generations coming through. I'm Gen X, we're on Gen Z, Gen Alpha is around the corner. We're going to start going through the rest of the Greek alphabet to get there at some point, I feel like. And it's one of those that as we see demographics change and we see more people being more conscious of mental health, I think that is a critical one right now for our athletes. And we've always joked, I don't know about you, but as a coach, I said, my title is not just head coach. It's counselor, admissions person, financial aid, a nutritionist, strength and conditioning coach, you name it. But I think that title of counselor, whereas I'm not certified, I know exactly who I need to go to. I am very well aware that these kids are going through a lot more than I did. And I think the sensory overload that they're getting, and they're inundated with information. And I've said it on countless shows. I'm going to probably say it till this podcast ends, whenever. But the fact that we as a society now can find information on our phone, which is more powerful than the computers you and I used in our college days, is staggering to me. Because I feel like I grew up watching Star Trek and I saw the little technology they had, and it's kind of all here. So it's definitely interesting.
It's amazing. It's funny because I'll tell them, like, I didn't have a cell phone in college, and they're just like, what? So they can't even picture that life. And I remember, I think by my senior year at University of Washington, I think we had emailing, but you only could email on campus. It was just like campus email. You didn't really expand, anything else. So, but you're exactly right. One thing, and when you're talking about culture, some of the change, I think what we've had to work on too is teaching our athletes to trust each other. If they have a teammate that's having a hard day, that needs a day, to trust that they're doing the best thing for them. And your job is not to second guess it. Your job is to trust that they're doing what they need to do to get better, to be here 100% for the team. And so we kind of talk a lot about that. I can't remember what, coaching, you always steal things from everybody, but like our 3 pillars that I talk about in the Wildcat way is trust, respect, and love. Like, I think it has to come from them. And I think that's the way the culture shifted, because mental health is they have so much more stress now. And just like you said, so much coming at them that they need to back up and, I guess, not judge each other, but trust that everyone's doing everything they need to do to be the best for the team every day. And if that's taking off so they can go talk to the counselor or go figure out a class, then that's what they need to do. I talk like I want them present with us in the practice. But if they're so stressed out or something's going on at home, they need to go deal with that so they can come back and get something out of the workout that day.
I think you hit it right there on the head, in that kids are overwhelmed right now. And again, I'm not picking on this generation, but I think our generation was just as overwhelmed, but in a different way. And we did not have the way to express it. And we were almost told, don't express it. We don't want to hear about your problems. Oh, you're a poor college kid. Oh, woe is me. You don't have a job. Okay, you're right. We are poor college kids, but doesn't mean we don't have the same kind of stressors that are going on in the real world. And I think this generation, millennials as well, and Gen Alpha will be the same way. They are able to express themselves and say, holy crap, the world's falling on around me. I need help. And I think we're becoming more equipped as coaches to recognize that. And I know I'm not the same person I was dealing with it 5 years ago. I think the pandemic accelerated things. I've said that to anybody who will listen. But I think it's also, we become more conscious. And I think educating our athletes is critical, of saying, why isn't little Susie here today? Well, little Susie is taking care of something. And that's all that needs to be said, obviously, for FERPA and things like that. We have to be mindful of that. But we also have to just say, you know what? There's going to come a day where you're going to have your mental health day, and you are going to need that day. And you're going to come to me and say, Coach, I I can't today. And that's the only thing you're going to say. And we built something in. I stole it from my time at the University of Nevada with Mike Richmond. I give him credit for this. He gave out personal days, and those are just coach personal practice. That's all I need. I don't need an entire explanation as to what you're going to take care of. You might be working on a project. You might be taking some time because you're overwhelmed with things, or you might be like my women's team in year one, and the entire group went to see 50 Shades of Grey on the opening night together.
Probably an amazing team bonding moment, you know?
It was for them, and it was the opposite for my men's team, because they're like, how come the women aren't here? And I go, personal day. And that's all I had to say. And they got all mad. I'm like, you guys had the same number, and whatever you want to do, you do. But it was the women's team who elected to tell me exactly what they were going to do. And I went, thank you. Thank you so very much for that. As coaches, I think we are evolving not only our training, because look at how fast everything has gotten in the last several years. Yeah. D3, I just talked with a coach of how amazingly fast that division has gotten. D2 is crazy. And then D1, we never thought, and we were there. We watched the super suits. You were in New Mexico State. I was in Nevada. We're like, these records will never get broken. And they've been shattered multiple times since. Watching Kate Douglas do what she did at Division I Nationals, but on the flip side, watching what Nova Southeastern's women did at Nationals this year, Kenyon, Denison, Emory destroying each other annually at Division III. It's great to watch that. But I want to focus now on Division II. Again, that is near and dear to my heart. I swam it. I am an Ashland University alum. I love my Eagles. I love Division II swimming. And I had Jimmy Tierney on, and we talked about the COVID national championships and what they went through with that. But I want to talk with you because Division II of all the divisions, maybe NAIA is the only other one, is in a constant state of flux. You have teams coming in, you have teams going out. Queens obviously just transitioning to Division I. We're hearing whispers of schools in the GLIAC and other conferences that are investigating Division I. But I also know here in the NAIA, I know where all our schools go. I mean, Cal Bap went from NAIA to Division II. Now they're D1 in the span of 10 years. Talk to me about how, with Division II, how you adjust for that, or how the landscape is constantly changing and how that impacts the sport as a whole.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. I think the interesting part, I think a lot of people thought, oh, Queens is going to be gone. There's going to be, more room for me. But, everybody fills up the gaps. Like you said, Nova did, and Indy and all of those guys. It is interesting. Even Lindenwood leaving
forgot about that one.
Yeah, my conference shifts. We used to have Ashland in our conference, and now we don't. So it shifts as well. I think the biggest thing, for me is to start staying centered where I want to be. I want to be on the national level. I want to be, it's always been my goal to have a team in the top 10. Our women were 13th a couple of years ago. So we're knocking on the door. And being on that national scene and being relevant is always huge. So I think that starts first of where we want to be. But then, looking at the broader landscape, there are teams that are kind of coming and going, and just being able to be fluid and maybe looking at, like Lake State is adding a team, and we're very excited. The closest team to us was Green Bay, Division I team, and they're 3 hours away. We're very excited. There's Michigan Tech I think they're thinking about adding a team too, which is about an hour and a half from us. And Michigan Tech is talking about it as well. So I don't think that it's been on the rumblings the last couple of years. And so I don't think they've advertised for a position yet, but I think that could be coming down the line, which would be really cool to have 3 teams in the UP, which would be really, really great. And great for swimming. I think as many teams as we can, we talk about being part of the college coaches board, talking about preserving our sport, more opportunities for our sport. And the nice thing about, Division II is, being able to, there's less talk about dropping men. I mean, it's the men are there. Most of our schools kind of look at those teams as enrollment teams, and and I think coaches need to be cognizant of their numbers, so they're helping the university. I think that's the bigger thing I've noticed from going kind of D1 to D2 is being able to look at like, this is my team and a program, but how can we help the university as well, and if that means I need 30 men and 30 women, then that's what I need. And that'll be our team. But, I always want to do the best that I can, but you also kind of have that in the back of your mind. Well, they need help on move-in day. And so I've had myself and coaches in the past have gone to help any student, on move-in day, move into their dorm. I know that myself and my staff, we helped deliver meals for the COVID students that were in quarantine. Went and got trained on how to put on the PPE. So when they're asking for something, I try to be cognizant of we need to be present on campus and going to help the university as well, because I feel very supported here, which is another thing. I don't worry about them dropping the program or anything. I feel very supported here as a whole, which I think is really important, and maybe not all coaches get to feel that. But I also think it's a two-way street. When they're asking for volunteers, I got to show up and do everything I can to help our university as well. But yeah, the D2 landscape is fluid for sure.
I know there have been a few NAI schools that have they've floated the idea of transitioning up. One will actually be doing it out on the West Coast. Westmont College will be moving in. They're just following the pattern of Concordia, Irvine, Fresno Pacific, Biola, Cal Bap, Azusa, that kind of filling in those Division II conferences out on the West Coast. And I think you hit it on the head there when you've mentioned you're not as worried at the Division II or Division III or NAIA level of them dropping men's swimming because it is an enrollment driver. I'm excited that Lake Superior State is adding men's and women's. And I thought when you said the closest one, I was about to say, oh, Saginaw Valley. And then I thought about it. Now that's about 4.5, 5 hours. I forget.
That's about 5.5.
Oh, wow. And because I forget where Marquette is on the Upper Peninsula. So I can find things on the Lower Peninsula. That's exactly how I was told to look for things by my teammates who are from Michigan. And I think it's great to hear Michigan Tech's adding, and that'll only reinforce the sport in the GLIAC conference as well as Division II. I know here in the NAIA, we have a lot of schools that are investigating. So I hear all the time about programs getting added because people want to ask me questions about it. And I'm grateful for that. I look forward to talking with them about it. But I also caution them. I'm like, you have to put the right people into these places. You can't just hire somebody with 1 to 2 years experience because they're really enthusiastic because they've never sat in that chair before. And you need somebody who can recruit because you are clearly adding the sport to help with your enrollment. And I think that is the most important thing is you're putting the right people into place to grow your program and grow your university and create that footprint. I know here at Cumberland's, the swimmers are first and foremost. We get our faces in front of everything we can because I have a big personality and I'm in front of everything. So I want my athletes to emulate that. And for some of them, it's a fight. But Division II has always been a change. I think about it. My senior year of college was Oakland University's last year in D2. And Drury had just come in from the NAIA. And so the landscape has changed dramatically. Like the powers that be when I swam, UC Davis, Cal Bakersfield, Oakland, Drury, Denver was Division II at the time. They had just transitioned out. So and South Dakota. So a lot of the powers that I had in Division II are now all D1, and you're seeing new faces constantly evolving in the sport and coming to the forefront and standing out. And it's exciting. Lindenwood had just moved out of the NAIA when I got here, and now they're Division I in the Summit League. And Cal Bap, I mentioned earlier, Queens. I don't think even Queens existed when I started here at Cumberland.
They're a new college.
Yeah, new program and everything. So, and they're already moving to Division I. So it's going to be interesting to see. Like I said, I've heard some whispers of who may be next in the Division II level. I'm not going to break any news right now. I also don't want to be the guy who says something and then has an athletic director call me down the line and going, you need to shut up now. But again, I know NAIA programs are looking at the possibility as well, but we just got the announcement. We're adding 3 new NAIA programs over the next 2 years. Plus we've heard 4 other schools. So the growth of the sport, the growth of the opportunity for the athletes is critical. And especially considering that we're not going to have as many kids to pull from because we're finding less and less kids are going off to college. it's going to be critical that we have the right coaches in place who are learning what they need to do the best job they can to service their universities and their athletes. And I'm excited. I'm going to have Gene Fleck on down the line, and we're going to talk about mentoring through the CSCA, because I know that's her baby and I'm excited for it. I think Gene can talk about 2 or 3 hours on that subject, so that'll be a lot of fun.
Well, the one thing I think I was thinking about when you were talking about that is sometimes when universities maybe hire to a coach that hasn't had that time for the mentoring process, you can learn a lot, and I don't think they realize how much is in there. And I've actually heard younger coaches say, I probably should have been an assistant another year or a couple more years before jumping into it, because it's not just knowing swimming, like what you even said, like that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's the NCAA rules, it's the fitting in the college, it's the how your recruiting process. There's so many layers and levels. It's not just knowing swimming and training like that. There's so many layers there that maybe having, just another year under that person and then you're really ready to go, I think is important.
I know when I took the head coaching job here, I got a year behind you. You got your first head coaching job at Northern Michigan. I remember being an assistant, and I had a different experience where you were, I don't know if I want to be a head coach, whereas I was like, yeah, I could take the big chair. I could be the guy. And then you sit behind that desk and you realize it's all on you. And I wouldn't have it any other way right now, and especially now that I've been able to navigate it. But having mentors, having people I could call, having people I could talk to, and now creating support groups among my coaching brethren. I'm in 2 or 3 different group chats with 5 or 6 other coaches, and I'll be bouncing ideas, not just from a training standpoint of, hey, how would you handle this discipline situation? Or how would you handle this? But just to make sure that I'm not flying off at the handle and then realizing there's one group chat I'm in, literally, if I'll say I'm going to do something, I seem to be the rational one. And if I'm the rational one in the conversation, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. But I think it's important that we as coaches are building those support groups and having the people we can talk to and we can lean on, and not just talk about swimming, but talk about our personal lives and seek advice on that. I think that's going to be critical for our mental health, which I plan on having a whole podcast on that. I've got a great guest. I'm teasing it. I don't want to spoil it yet, but I have someone wonderful that we're going to have on at some point to talk about.
That NCAA study that found that coaches' mental health is really struggling right now too. So I think that's important.
100%. All right, Coach. We got our last segment. I call this 650s on the top. It's either this or that. I need quick answers from you. Are you ready?
So I just say this or that.
Well, no, I'm going to give you 2 items. You got to pick one or the other.
Okay, got it. Okay.
All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
M&M's or Kit Kats?
Kit Kats.
Hot coffee or iced coffee?
Hot coffee.
I was saying the Upper Peninsula.
It just depends. Cold coffee now, but hot coffee all winter.
The 1650 free or the 50 free?
16.
Says the open water coach right there. With your family, trivia night or board game night?
Board game night.
Sub question on that. How many fights have broken out playing Monopoly?
Not very many. We don't play too much Monopoly, but we got Catan is a big one. So, yeah.
See, Monopoly ended up getting banned in this household because tables just got flipped over. Twitter or Instagram?
Instagram.
All right. You went to school at the University of Washington. You spent time in the Pacific Northwest. Better coffee, Starbucks or Seattle's Best?
Starbucks. Sorry. I know.
Starbucks
started I didn't drink coffee till I got to college. And when you're in Seattle, you go to Starbucks. And that was, I know what I'm getting every single time.
I had an athlete who was from Spokane, so the other side of the state. And we didn't have a Starbucks here in town. She would drive the 30 to 40 minutes north to London, Kentucky, to get her Saturday morning Starbucks. Because she's like, I can't do it during the week. I don't have time. But that was her obsession. God. And we brought in another girl who was from Vancouver, Washington. And the moment she found out about that, she's like, well, I just have Seattle's Best flown in. And I thought the two of them were going to fight. I legitimately, I was about to see a battle royal go over coffee, and I don't drink it. Like, I'm the only one in my house who doesn't. So it's not one of those things I'll die on. Now,
Yeah.
Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew. Okay, then we can fight. But even that I've had to give up.
Got it.
Well, Coach, I really want to thank you so very much for
Yes.
being on the show. It's been a lot of fun. You and I obviously served together on the CSCA board. You just finished your tenure. So
Yep.
now you get to go free. I got one more year. And I know sitting in those meetings, the question I always get asked about the CSCA, and I'm going to have Sam on at some point, is what do they actually do besides the academic All-American or the Scholar athletes? People understood the stuff that's going on behind the scenes that we have to deal with. And obviously the big conversation we talked about was the future of NCAA Division I national championships and the impact that's going to have on all divisions. I think people need to get more involved in the CSCA, not just come to convention, but get involved with the board if they have an opportunity, because there's a lot of things that we are policymakers on. And Joel Schinnefeld, Greg Earhart, Sam Barony, both of them, all three of them, I should say, have done an amazing job of promoting our sport, especially in this chaotic time of the transfer portal, NIL, talking about the Power Five separating out. I think we are uniquely set up as a sport and a governing body to help going forward. And you've seen it on the front lines. I'm seeing it now. And I think for us as the lower divisions, I think us putting a little perspective in sometimes for some of these coaches, it helps, because I love
when they say, just have your assistants do it. And you're like, what?
I call it first world problems.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I call it. And
one thing that I like is that just learning the process of how long it takes to make a change. And if you want something to change down the line 5 years from now, it's got to be talked about now. And I don't think people realize how long that process is and how much work needs to get in to do that. So that's what I've really learned from the board.
The best example of that is when Clark Campbell, the head coach of the University of Kansas, brought up they finally got a recruiting calendar, and it took them 20 years to get one into place. And that blows my mind that it took that long for something as simple as a calendar. And I can only imagine, obviously, I didn't sit on those committees. Matt Barony at Richmond has, and he's seen it. And to me, it's a calendar. This shouldn't be any problem. But the debating and the arguing that goes on, I think more coaches need to come to convention and be involved with the CSCA on some level and understand the processes for all the divisions, because whatever happens at D1 doesn't necessarily affect D2 and D3 or NEIA, but it could. And you have to be prepared. And I know the Division II coaches are going to have that conversation, as well as the D3 coaches. And I'm kind of on an island with the NEIA because we have a whole different rule set, and it's kind of nice because we really don't have rules. It's the wild, wild west, and it rules. But again, it's understanding the legislative process to get change made. And I've always hated people who sit back and complain about things because you accomplish nothing. Dip your foot into this pool and realize the problems that we face and the fires we're putting out that you don't even see. I'm grateful for your time on the board. I'm sad to see you go. I'm excited to see Jimmy because I've known him for a while too. Again, Coach, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited, and we look forward to following Northern Michigan Wildcats down the line.
Well, thanks so much. Yes, I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.